Hello parents and professionals, and thank you for joining me today. Today we are going to be talking about how it is that you can minimize your reactions so that what might have been an overreaction starts to become a little bit more measured and reasonable and fair given the context of the challenge that has been presented to you. So if you would like to know how to minimize your reactions, then just keep on watching. Alright, so if you've ever been in a situation where you've had a reaction and you have been fully driven by your emotions in that moment, and then you later look back on it and go, may have overreacted there a little bit. Trust me, you are not alone. We've all been there. Literally, everyone has had that happen at some point in their life. What can be a problem is when this becomes a repetitive pattern of behaviour. So if you're watching this video now because you've had like a one-off overreaction, don't worry. It's probably going to be fine. But the people that I'm really talking to today are my serial offenders who know that you've got a little bit of a pattern habit of overreacting unnecessarily. So let's just mention a few different things about this. If you have had a one-off overreaction, it's not too late to go back and correct it. And it might feel uncomfortable to do so, but explaining why you got to that point might be a way for you to kind of reconcile how you ended up reacting in that way, but to also help the other person understand why it got to that point too, and to also help them to avoid it. Now, before you go deep diving into that conversation, you might want to actually spend some time reflecting and going, where did all of that reaction come from? And it might be that that reaction has been an accumulative effect of lots of different things building up over time, and it's just caused one hell of an explosion to happen. But what I really want to focus on today is, as I said, those people who find themselves overreacting more than you should do. And for those of you who want to avoid having that happening again in the future, I'm going to give you some tips on what to do about it.
What can I do?
So thing number one, this is something that I actually share with children and young people, and it's just a little acronym that I call TITAT. And TITAT stands for Take Your Time and Think. Even though there may be something happening or something that has happened that is going to demand some serious attention from you, it doesn't necessarily mean that right now is the moment for you to give it that attention. In fact, very often when it's the big stuff, the scary stuff or the serious stuff, the thing that is most important for you to do is to reflect before you react. So taking your time to think, and that taking your time to think might be 3 days, it might be 3 minutes, it might just be 3 seconds. It just means giving yourself a moment to pause and asking yourself the question, what's going to be the right way for me to deal with this situation, rather than just dealing with the situation. Often when we're faced with a situation that feels like an emergency, it feels like we should be reacting fast, and that's not always a good idea. Normally, the best reactions come from taking a moment to evaluate what needs to happen, so that you at least have an idea of where it is you want to get to, rather than just dealing with the fire that's broken out in front of you, or whatever that explosion might have been that you are dealing with. So taking your time and thinking about it, even if it's just for a couple of seconds, can help you to react in a more measured way and something that's more appropriate for the situation that you're dealing with. The other important thing that taking your time and thinking can do is give you time to gather further information about what it is that's going on, what actually is the problem here. Oh, have you ever been in a situation where you have reacted and then later found out some information about that scenario that you were not privy to before, and it's a game changer? And then you're like, oh, if I'd known that, then I wouldn't have reacted in that way. And then it's a whole other layer of complication. So using that time to pause and reflect may also give you time to really explore all of the facts before you start responding to them. And that might turn out to be incredibly important. Don't assume that you've got the full story and then react. Always assume that there's some piece of important information missing and then have a reaction. Now, I'm not saying to you, don't lose your temper sometimes, don't get angry, because actually those things may be relevant and they may be important in the situation that you're dealing with. It's just that they might not be important things for you to do every single time, and certainly you want to make sure that if you are going to be using your internal Incredible Hulk, stop, that you're doing it for a really good reason and that you've got all of the information that you need to be able to assume that that's the right reaction for you to have. So as well as creating these interruptions or slowing downs for ourselves before having a reaction, there's a couple of other things that you can do as well if you want to become someone who is overreactive far less. So the other thing that you can do is to actually make this situation like less intense and stressful and instead to kind of flip that on its head, make it quite comedic. And this sounds like it might be the toughest thing to do in a highly stressed situation where you feel like you're on the verge of exploding into wild anger. But if you can look at the situation and find either something funny in it or something in it that you can kind of completely lighten the mood and flip it on its head, you won't just do that for the other people involved, you'll also do it for yourself. Now, the important thing about doing that for others is that all of that energy and anticipation and maybe even defensiveness that they're about to throw at you will dissipate. It will completely evaporate, and that will change the way that you feel too. But the thing that it does for you is, even though you might still have an undercurrent of frustration, is it will just neutralizes the way in which you're feeling at that particular moment in time. Okay, here's an example for you. Once upon a time, a long time ago, I used to be a nanny. And I was with the children, and I was sort of helping them to become a little more independent in some of the tasks that we would do throughout the day. It was the school holidays, and we were making lunch, and the older of the two children, who was probably about 10 or 11 at the time, wanted baked beans on toast for lunch. So I said to him, make it yourself, you're gonna be good. Anyways, when it came to taking the baked beans out of the microwave, I'd said to him, make sure you grab a dishcloth, or what's the word I'm looking for, a tea towel, as you take the baked beans out of the microwave because the dish might be hot. He decided that he had hands made of asbestos and did not need to take my advice on board, and instead took the glass bowl out of the microwave containing the baked beans that had been in there for several minutes, and had a slightly delayed reaction, which we often do when it comes to touching something hot, where he got as far as taking the bowl out of the microwave and past the side of the kitchen worktop and over the marbled kitchen floor before his brain went, oh, it's a little hot, and then dropped it, and the whole thing shattered into a gazillion pieces with baked beans everywhere. Now, in that moment, in that exact moment, the first thing that came to me was, I told you to use a tea towel when you pick it up. What I wanted to do in that moment was to make my point very clear and really to just go, this is all on you, and to chuck all the blame in his direction. What I did instead, because I guess it was quite an explosive smash of baked beans and glass everywhere, so it did actually force me to take a moment to think, because I was also then going into health and safety mode around the fact that there was glass everywhere. So in that moment of kind of pausing and evaluating the situation and being aware that there was a dog who likes to rush in whenever any food's dropped on the floor, but amongst this food is glass. So in this like pause of, we need to actually think about how to manage this situation, I said something like, everybody stand very still. We're drowning in a sea of baked beans right now. And it instantly, although it didn't get a big laugh, I'll be honest, but it did instantly lighten the situation so that it wasn't any more dramatic than it needed to be at that moment in time. And we got there because I threw a teeny tiny bit of comedy value into it. And what that also did for me was to kind of tell myself, it's not as bad as you think it is. It's all fixable. Everything's going to be okay. So I didn't have to have my massive overreaction. Whereas if I'd gone with my initial thought of, I told you to use a blooming tea towel and you haven't done it, then it's likely that my reaction and what came out of my mouth would have been a lot more unkind and unreasonable. The other important thing that I did in that particular situation is to take the dramatic situation, which is likely to cause an overreaction, and to pace it to a greater maximum than what it is already. So here's what I mean by that. If we have a bad situation that's happened, for example, child has dropped a glass bowl of baked beans all over the marble floor, that's the situation. But by saying, everybody, we're drowning in a sea of baked beans, actually that wasn't the reality. So I've just taken the scenario and blown it up to seem much bigger than it really is. But I've done it in a way that actually creates perspective around the situation itself. I'm not doing it to make it seem more dramatic. I'm doing it to create perspective that actually this isn't as big as it looks. It could be, we could literally be drowning in a sea of baked beans at the moment. Guess what? We're not. Why is there so much exterior noise? So this might be a strategy that can work for you too. If in that moment it feels like the walls are falling in on you and all you can do is to have a big old explosive reaction around it, instead go, it could be even bigger. And then in that moment, it will shrink your level of and ferociousness, because you'll realise actually it's maybe not as bad as I might have been about to make it out to be. So these are just some of the ways in which you can begin to reduce your likelihood of overreacting. I'm going to go back through them one more time just to make sure that you have thoroughly got them embedded into your mind. Number one is take your time and think. Make sure that you give yourself adequate time to really take a breath, to put some perspective into play, whether it's days, minutes, or seconds. Just pause before you let words flow out of your mouth. Number two ties in with that one quite nicely, because we're going to use that spare time to potentially ensure that we do have all of the information that we need to really make an informed decision about how it is that we're going to react to what has happened. Number three is we are going to make this scenario comedic if we can. Can we actually turn this situation into something amusing or funny? Because if we do that, it's going to minimize the tension that's going on outside of us, which will then have a positive effect on how we want to react and respond. And we can also shrink the bad feelings for ourselves by maybe just lightening the mood around the whole thing before we go into the reaction that we want to have. Now, it might be that we go overboard with the comedy and suddenly, what was an important situation now seems like it's purely funny, in which case we still need to return to it and go, but listen guys, seriously, it's also important that you take on board XYZ, that shouldn't have happened. But this was really funny, I'll give you that. And actually make a lesson from it that way. And the fourth thing that we can do to prevent overreacting is to make sure that we really get perspective on the situation that we're reacting to by almost thinking about, what if it was even bigger? What if this was paced out to the maximum? How then does that shrink the situation that I'm really dealing with, put it into better perspective, and help me to manage the reaction that I'm going to have? So if you found anything in here useful or valuable to you in some way, then make sure, for my YouTube friends, that you subscribe to this channel by hitting the red subscribe button. Give this video a thumbs up and leave me a comment in the comments box below if you've had an experience of being able to shrink your overreactions over time, and if so, how you did it, and how that may be different to the techniques that I've shared with you today. But for now, thank you all so much for watching and listening, and I will see you in the next video next month. Bye!